There's no easy way to deal with grief. With no roadmap or step-by-step guide, we're all left having to figure out what our own unique path to healing looks like. It's a journey that's riddled with fear, confusion, and frustration until we find peace. But for Lisa Roberts, the finish line was nowhere to be found after she lost her mom. Instead of finding her footing, Roberts felt buried under the weight of her grief.
I did not know how to manage it and manage those feelings, manage life at that time, because it was just so much going on. I had cared for her until she passed. And so that was something that I have never had to do for someone. So that in itself was an experience. And then adjusting to the loss was something that, your mom, I just did not know how to deal with that.
Unable to find her way out of these feelings, Roberts got connected to a grief counselor. It was the first time she could put a name to the foreign feelings she was drowning in: depression. And though they agreed she needed to seriously consider medication, Roberts' hesitation stemmed from the fear of dedicating so much time to drugs that wouldn't end up working.
I was a bit reluctant to even consider medication, simply because, what if it didn't work? Now I got to start all over again. And then if that doesn't work, then I got to start over. Well, what if it makes me sick? There were just so many things that were in my head. And I was very reluctant to even think about it. I knew that I needed to feel better soon. And going through the trial and error, it just wasn't, you want to get well quick, fast, and in a hurry.
3 qualities that aren't often used to describe the process of finding the right psychiatric medication. People often need to try an antidepressant for 8 weeks before evaluating its performance, and many people go through several different drugs before finding one that works for them. That's a lot of wasted time for patients like Roberts, who is already at the end of her rope. As an alternative option to the trial and error approach, her counselor mentioned a DNA test that could help direct her to the medications with the highest match potential. The field is called pharmacogenomics, and the genetic tests predict how a person's genes affect their body's response to medications. Jennifer Hawkins says it does this by looking at how effective the patient's different metabolic pathways are at breaking down certain chemicals.
With some of our medications, particularly our antidepressants, if we are metabolizing them too slowly, then the drug can accumulate over time. And that accumulation can have off-target effects. So it can, actually hang on to the receptors or the targets of these drugs a little too long. Or maybe they target another part of the body that they normally wouldn't have if we were able to kind of just process and eliminate the drugs as expected. So those are some of the side effects that occur if we metabolize certain drugs too slowly.
On the other hand, metabolizing a drug too fast doesn't allow us to get any of the benefits before it leaves our system. Hawkins is the pharmacogenomics clinical specialist at Cleveland Clinic. She says that even drugs under the same classification can be metabolized differently based on a person's genetic makeup.
We have a class of antidepressants called selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors. And even within that class, they're metabolized differently. They may have similar actions, but their pathway of being broken down is different. And so we have to take the different pathways into account. And so I have patients who come in and say, well, I've tried these 2 SSRIs and they didn't work. So SSRIs must not work for me. And I'm like, well, wait a second. Actually, let's take a step back. It may be that those 2 happen to go down this one specific pathway that maybe you had decreased metabolism of, and that's why you had the side effects. That's why the drug didn't work.
So instead of playing a guessing game, the DNA test gives some insight into how well your different metabolic pathways work, which can then be matched up to drugs that use those specific routes. The test takes samples of DNA through a blood draw or a cheek swab, then gets sent off to a lab that breaks down the person's genetic results. It's then up to the medical provider to interpret this data and recommend different medications and doses that will have the best odds of working.
In the field of psychiatry, we do have some of that, but I think it's a little bit more complicated because, these drugs, there's even more nuances to it. So sometimes we are able to give more specific recommendation of, yes, you need to start at 50%, what most people would normally start at. Sometimes it's a little bit more gray, and we just say like, well, you could start the usual dose, but instead of increasing dose every week or 2 weeks, you might want to wait 3 or 4 weeks to see how the patient does on this.
When Roberts got her test results back, her counselor was able to interpret the results and compile a list of medications believed to work best with her body.
She was able to see some medications that would not work well with me, with my system, with some of the things that go on with me, and some medications that could possibly work well. She was able to provide me with a list of medications that, well, maybe this one would work for you. And if it doesn't, we can look at this. But I was able to see the list, the recommendations that she had, and hopefully avoid that trial and error. And luckily, we did avoid that trial and error. And it wasn't this prolonged going back and forth. And that made a big difference with me.
Roberts found the right antidepressant on the first try, but even with the extra guidance from pharmacogenomics, not everyone gets that lucky. For many people, they still have to make tweaks to find their personal sweet spot of medication. Hawkins believes practitioners need to be completely transparent about the limitations of this testing so the patients have a realistic expectation of the process. One example of this is that even finding drugs that are metabolized normally won't get rid of all the risks and side effects.
We're not using pharmacogenomics to eliminate all side effects. That would be my dream. But we anticipate that even in normal metabolizers, there may be some mild side effects, for example, a little bit of GI upset or maybe some mild headaches. What we're trying to do is to avoid the really severe side effects that cause patients to stop the medication or end up, like I said, in the hospital.
Many of the other limitations are directly connected to the amount of knowledge that's in the field. Though they are currently looking at the metabolic pathways, there are other genetic variants that contribute to how drugs affect the body.
We're still studying those. And I know that that's going to make a huge impact once there's more studies out there that tell us, what to do if we see genetic variants in the targets, being able to be even more specific than where we are now.
And of course, the patient's lifestyle has a huge effect that a DNA test can't really take into account. Smoking, alcohol use, and age are all big factors that affect liver function and can drastically impact how our system processes medication. Another factor patients need to be aware of is that there could be a difference in results based on which lab your sample is sent to.
These labs, they're not necessarily sequencing someone's genome. They're looking at particular spots. And so if a lab doesn't look at a particular spot, what they typically do is they tell the physician or the pharmacist or whoever's ordering the test, hey, this patient is a normal metabolizer. But if I were to take that same patient sample and send it to lab B, where they look at that particular spot in question, maybe that rare variant, I might get a different result back. And so lab B may say, actually, this person is an intermediate metabolizer.
Labs look at different spots in the genome, partly due to the population they're serving. Certain populations may have a gene variant that's rarer in other communities, so some labs may not even test for that allele.
So there may be a variant that's more common in, for example, in those of European descent versus in those of Asian descent, for example. And if you're using a test that covers variants mostly in the European population, but your patient population is mostly Asian, then you're probably going to have a little bit of a mismatch in terms of results and interpretation.
Which means that it's important to ask these questions the labs you and your doctor are considering. Despite these limitations, Roberts says it was well worth her time and money.
I'm here, plain and simple. It's worth being here. I am here. I'm happy. I can be a part of my family's life. I can do the things that I want to do and manage.
Hawkins says one of the most valuable aspects of pharmacogenomics is the control it gives patients over their care.
Being able to say, well, this particular patient has significantly decreased or poor metabolism of these 3 drugs. Not to say that we can't use them. We're going to have to significantly dose adjust, but maybe due to concerns about side effects, we rule these out or we push them to the bottom of the list. And that's really where, I love working with our psychiatrists because they're able to have these conversations with patients and say, like, what's your biggest concern? Is it the concern of taking a medication and not working, or is it the concern of side effects? Because that can really influence a patient's decision on whether they take a medication or stay on a particular medication.
The field of pharmacogenomics is continuing to grow with each new piece of research. So while it currently analyzes metabolic pathways, the options for future applications is limitless. Some labs have even started including extra data in the hopes that it will one day soon be valuable.
And I tell patients this all the time. I may obtain, some results where I would tell you, like, I don't have any, or I don't have enough studies to be able to use this in your care today. But knowing this, I encourage patients to always reach out to us every few years and say, like, hey, where are the studies? Is there enough info out there now for you to be able to use these other information that was obtained and tested for to now help further better my care?
Interpreting the data can be complex, but it may one day lead to a future where we get the best medication for our unique body the very first time. You can find more information about Jennifer Hawkins, Lisa Roberts, and all of our guests on our website, radiohealthjournal.org. Our writer-producer is Kristen Farah. Our executive producer is Amira Zaveri. I'm Elizabeth Westfield.